"Your brother is a better husband than you," my wife whispered, leaning in during my parents' anniversary dinner at the Olive Garden. I smiled calmly and replied, "He always has been." The Caesar salad froze midair as I slid the divorce papers across the table, spreading photos of them exiting the same motel where I'd proposed 5 years ago. Turns out Wednesday night yoga class was actually downward dog with my brother. Plot twist. You know that special talent some families have for creating memories that require decades of therapy? Welcome to the Sullivan Family Highlight Reel, where betrayal comes with unlimited breadsticks and a side of marinara sauce. I'm Archer Sullivan, 34, history professor at Westbrook Community College in Fairfield, Ohio. A town so small our only claim to fame is having 3 Subway restaurants within a 5-mile radius. I teach teenagers about historical disasters while living through my own personal Hindenburg every day. The irony isn't lost on me. My brother Wade, 31, the golden child with the charm of a televangelist and the moral compass of a Wall Street banker during bonus season, works in sales, which really means he convinces retirees to buy timeshares they can't afford in places they'll never visit. But hey, he drives a BMW and has perfect teeth, so clearly he's winning at life. My wife, soon-to-be ex-wife, Estelle, 32, is a pharmaceutical sales rep with a talent for getting doctors to prescribe medications and apparently a talent for getting prescribed my brother. We met at a mutual friend's Super Bowl party 6 years ago. She was drinking white wine at a beer event. Should have been my first red flag. The second was when she said Tom Brady was overrated. In Ohio, that's practically grounds for deportation. So there we were. The whole Sullivan clan plus Estelle's parents who'd driven up from Kentucky, packed into a corner booth at the Olive Garden like sardines in a can of familial dysfunction. My mom, Linda, 63, was doing what she does best, pretending everything is fine while drinking enough Moscato to tranquilize a horse. My dad, Richard, 65, was complaining about his golf handicap and how those millennials are ruining the country club atmosphere. Estelle's parents, Martha and Floyd Kendrick, were their usual delightful selves. Her mom continuously mentioning how her friend's daughter married a doctor, not a teacher, and her dad asking if I'd finally invested in cryptocurrency like he'd suggested at Christmas. Because nothing says sound financial advice like a retired postal worker who still uses AOL. And then there was Aunt Meredith, Dad's sister, 68, the family gossip nuclear reactor who hadn't had an unexpressed thought since 1987. She was wearing enough perfume to violate EPA regulations and kept showing everyone pictures of her Shih Tzu, Mr. Bentley, on her phone with a cracked screen protector. The annual Sullivan anniversary dinner, a tradition sacred as the Super Bowl and just as full of disappointment, overpriced beer, and men failing to deliver on promises. I'd known about Estelle and Wade for 3 weeks, 2 days, and approximately 7 hours. Not that I was counting. The revelation came courtesy of my Target Visa card statement, which showed a charge at a gas station in Riverdale, 15 miles in the opposite direction of Estelle's alleged yoga studio. Call it a historian's attention to detail, or just the pathetic vigilance of a man who suspected he was being played like a game of Monopoly, where everyone else knows the rules but you. One afternoon of amateur detective work later, following my wife with the stealth of a man who's watched too many true crime documentaries, I found myself in the parking lot of the Bluebird Motel, the same motel where 5 years ago I'd nervously practiced my proposal speech in the bathroom before getting down on one knee and offering Estelle a future that apparently had an expiration date. I sat in my sensible Honda Accord, bought used because teacher's salary, and watched my brother's BMW pull in at 6:42 p.m. 12 minutes later, my wife arrived. They didn't even check for familiar cars in the parking lot. That's how much they respected my intelligence. And that's when I decided, if they wanted to star in a soap opera, I'd give them a season finale no one would forget. 3 weeks of planning, of smiling through dinner conversations about Wade's latest promotion, of nodding sympathetically when Estelle complained about how stressful her job was, of pretending I didn't know that the lavender bath salt gift from her work friend Jessica was actually from the Bluebird Motel bathroom. For a history teacher who specializes in the Civil War, I knew a thing or two about strategic warfare. The element of surprise is everything. I picked the anniversary dinner deliberately. My parents' 40th, a milestone that should have been sacred. But then again, so was marriage, and that didn't stop my brother from parking his BMW in my garage, metaphorically speaking. The evening started like they all do. Dad bragging about his golf game, Mom pretending to listen, Wade arriving fashionably late with some excuse about client meetings while flashing his Rolex, a gift to himself for crushing his sales goals. Estelle kept checking her phone under the table, probably texting my brother even though he was sitting 3 feet away. Real subtle, guys. The CIA is definitely missing out on 2 master spies here. I ordered scotch instead of my usual beer. Everyone noticed, but no one said anything. Classic Sullivan family dynamics. Acknowledge nothing until it explodes in your face. We were midway through the appetizers. Calamari for the table because nothing says celebrating 4 decades of marriage like deep-fried sea creatures when Estelle leaned over with that whisper. The whisper that would have crushed me 3 weeks ago, but now felt like the perfect setup to my carefully orchestrated demolition. Your brother is a better husband than you. Time slowed down. I could hear the clink of forks, the generic Italian music, my mother laughing too loudly at something Aunt Meredith said. I could see Wade's face, smug as he texted under the table. I could feel Estelle's hand on my thigh, the same hand that had been all over my brother, and suddenly I wasn't sad anymore. I was free. He always has been, I replied, reaching into my messenger bag, the one Estelle always made fun of because it wasn't a real briefcase like Wade's. I pulled out the manila envelope, sliding it across the checkered tablecloth. Photos spilled out, Wade and Estelle kissing in his car, entering the motel, time-stamped receipts, text message screenshots I'd recovered from our shared iPad that she thought she'd deleted, and on top of it all, divorce papers, already signed by me. But I think he should get the full experience, I continued, raising my scotch glass. So here's to the happy couple. May your marriage last at least as long as ours did. The silence that followed could have given a cemetery at midnight a run for its money. 5, 4, 3, 2. My mother broke first, the wine glass slipping from her hand and shattering on the floor like my former marriage. The red Moscato spread across the tile like a crime scene. Fitting, since I'd just murdered what was left of our family's facade of normalcy. Archer, what is this? My father demanded, his golf-tanned face turning the color of the marinara sauce on his fettuccine. He picked up one of the photos with his breadstick fingers, leaving oily prints on the glossy evidence of his son's mutual destruction. Wade, to his credit, maintained his salesman composure for about 3 more seconds before his face crumpled like a cheap suit. Bro, I can explain. Bro? I repeated, my voice eerily calm as I took another sip of scotch. Is that what you call the guy whose wife you're sleeping with? I thought the proper term was total jackass, but I didn't major in business communication like you did. Estelle's face performed an Olympic-worthy gymnastics routine from shock to anger to the fake tears that had gotten her out of a speeding ticket last summer. Archer, this isn't what it looks like, I finished for her. Please, Estelle, you're talking to a history teacher. We specialize in recognizing patterns, and this, I gestured to the photos, is a pattern as old as time, though usually not starring my brother as the other man. Aunt Meredith was already on her phone, no doubt live updating her bridge club. Martha Kendrick, my soon-to-be ex-mother-in-law, clutched her pearls so hard I thought the string might snap. In my day, she began, her Kentucky accent thickening with distress, people worked through their problems privately. In your day, people also smoked in hospitals and thought cocaine was a medicine, so maybe let's not use that as our moral benchmark, I replied, earning a choked sound from Wade that might have been a suppressed laugh. Traitor till the end. Floyd Kendrick's face had turned the color of the complimentary mints by the register. Now you listen here, young man. No, Floyd, you listen. I straightened my Target clearance rack tie. For 5 years, I've listened to you tell me how I should have gone into finance like Wade, how I should have invested in your brother-in-law's car wash franchise, how teaching history is a noble but limited career path. Well, turns out I taught myself something pretty valuable, how to spot historical revisionism happening in my own bedroom. The server chose this precise moment to arrive with our entrees, her peppy, "Who had the tour of Italy?" dying on her lips as she surveyed our family Chernobyl. She backed away slowly, mumbling something about checking on our breadsticks. My mother finally found her voice, somewhere at the bottom of her wine glass. Archer, honey, maybe we should discuss this at home. Which home, Mom? The one I've been paying the mortgage on while Wade's been making house calls? Or your home, where you've been telling me for years that I should be more like my brother? I leaned forward. Well, good news. I'm taking your advice. Starting tonight, I'm going to be exactly like Wade. Self-centered, disloyal, and apparently irresistible to pharmaceutical sales reps. Wade stood up, his expensive watch catching the light. "This is completely inappropriate," says the guy doing his brother's wife. "Please continue lecturing me on appropriate behavior. This should be fascinating." Estelle was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks. I'd once found that look endearing, back when I thought those tears were genuine. Now I just wondered if she'd practiced in the mirror. "You've been unhappy for months," she whispered. "You're always grading papers, always talking about your students, while you were always working late or at yoga or having drinks with the girls. At least one of us was honest about our extracurricular activities." I turned to Wade. "By the way, how was the presentation in Cincinnati last month? The one you asked me to help you prep for? Because according to your Instagram, you were actually in Cleveland at a Browns game with—" I pretended to check my phone, though I'd memorized this detail like a favorite historical date. Clients. Interesting how Estelle also happened to be visiting her college roommate in Cleveland that same weekend. Dad slammed his fist on the table, making the silverware jump. "That's enough." "No, Dad, it's not even close to enough." I gestured to the waiter hovering nervously nearby. "Could we get the check, please? And a to-go box. I've suddenly lost my appetite, but I paid for this meal, so I'm definitely taking those leftovers." My father's face was a thundercloud. "I was going to pay—" "Like you paid for Wade's BMW down payment, or his condo security deposit, or the loan last month that coincidentally matches the extended stay rate at the Bluebird Motel." I shook my head. "No thanks, Dad. I've got this one." Aunt Meredith, who'd been uncharacteristically quiet, probably because she was texting the entire Episcopal Church directory, finally spoke up. "Archer, honey, families go through hard times. Remember when your Uncle Philip ran off with his secretary back in '98? They worked it out. They got divorced 6 months later, Aunt Meredith. He lives in Tampa with his third wife, and Aunt Karen keys his car every Christmas when she's in Florida visiting her grandkids. Not exactly a Hallmark ending." The waiter returned with the check and 7 to-go containers, clearly eager for us to leave before we scared off the happy couples celebrating actual functional relationships around us. I slapped down my credit card, the same one that had caught Estelle's lie, poetic justice at its finest. "I've already moved my things out," I told Estelle as the waiter processed my payment. "You'll find the key to our house. Correction, my house, since my name's on the mortgage. On the kitchen counter next to the coffee maker you never learned to use properly. I'm staying at the Hampton Inn until the divorce is finalized." "The Hampton Inn?" Wade repeated incredulously. "Dude, you could have crashed at my place." The look I gave him could have frozen hell twice over. "Are you actually serious right now?" Wade shrank back in his overpriced dress shirt, finally recognizing the depth of his transgression, or more likely, recognizing that his golden boy status wouldn't save him this time. My mother was quietly sobbing now, Dad awkwardly patting her back with one hand, while examining the divorce papers with the other. Classic Richard Sullivan, even in emotional crisis, checking the financials. "You're giving her the Subaru?" he asked, frowning at the asset division. "Dad, I'm losing my wife, my brother, and apparently my family's respect in one night. I think I can part with a 5-year-old Subaru with a bumper dent from when Estelle backed into a cart return at Target." The server returned with my card and a forced smile that deserved an Oscar. "Will there be anything else tonight?" I looked around at the wreckage of my family dinner, at the betrayal served with a side of garlic bread, at my entire life imploding under cheap chandelier lighting. "Yes," I said, reaching for the dessert menu. "I'll take the chocolate lava cake. Just for me. They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but I prefer mine molten, like the chocolate lava cake I ate with deliberate slowness while my family watched in stunned silence. Each bite was a tiny victory, the first decision I'd made in years that was entirely for my own satisfaction. "You can't just drop this bomb and act like you're at a birthday party," Estelle hissed, her mascara now giving her raccoon eyes that matched her predatory nature. "Why not? You've been celebrating behind my back for months." I took another bite. "This cake is fantastic, by the way. Anyone want to try it?" "No? More for me." My mother had progressed from quiet sobbing to the 1,000-yard stare of a woman recalculating every parenting decision she'd ever made. Dad was still reviewing the divorce papers like they were a disappointing quarterly report. Wade kept checking his phone, probably canceling tonight's motel reservation. Real class act, my brother. What none of them knew, what they couldn't possibly suspect, was that this dinner was just the opening act. The Sullivan family drama was about to become a 3-part trilogy, and we were barely through the exposition. See, being a history teacher has its advantages. We're pattern recognizers, detail-obsessed, and we know that those who don't learn from the past are doomed to have their financial misconduct exposed at an Olive Garden on a Tuesday night. 3 days after discovering the affair, while Estelle was at her yoga class, I did something I'd never done before. I broke the unspoken rule of our marriage and went through her home office. Behind the framed pharmacy school diploma, and beneath a stack of pharmaceutical catalogs, I found a folder labeled Investment Opportunities. Inside was a treasure trove that would make Benedict Arnold look like an amateur. Bank statements showing transfers from our joint account to an LLC called Summit Ventures, emails between Wade and Estelle discussing the plan, and a brochure for a beachfront property in South Carolina. My brother, the brilliant businessman, had been convincing my wife to siphon money from our savings into his latest foolproof investment scheme, a timeshare development that, according to the county records I accessed through a former student who now worked in real estate, didn't actually exist. The property they'd been investing in was a vacant lot with 3 liens against it. Wade had shown Estelle doctored photos from a development in Florida, claiming it was their ground floor opportunity in Myrtle Beach. To give credit where it's due, Wade's PowerPoint game was impressive. Glossy renderings, projected returns that would make Warren Buffett blush, and testimonials from satisfied investors who, as a quick social media search revealed, were actually his fraternity brothers posing as wealthy clients. All told, they'd embezzled $4,200 to $700 from our joint savings. Money I'd been setting aside for a down payment on a better house, in a better neighborhood, with a better school district where I'd hoped to raise the children Estelle kept saying she wasn't ready for. Now I understood her hesitation. Hard to plan for kids when you're planning to abandon ship with your husband's brother and a suitcase full of his money. The cake really is exceptional, I said, scraping the last bite from the plate. Much like my evidence against both of you for financial fraud. The words hung in the air like the ceiling fans above us, slowly circulating the scent of garlic and betrayal. Wade's face drained of its perpetual tan. What are you talking about? I smiled, the kind of smile that would make my AP history students instantly check if their homework was due. Summit Ventures, LLC. The Myrtle Beach property that doesn't exist. The $42,700 transferred from my joint account with Estelle to your shell company. I tilted my head. Ring any bells, or should I keep going? Estelle's parents exchanged glances, the kind that suggested they might be regretting their daughter's choice in both husbands and criminal conspirators. That's a private business arrangement, Estelle began, but her voice lacked conviction. Even she couldn't spin embezzlement as a misunderstanding. So private that you never mentioned it to your husband and co-account holder? That's not private, Estelle. That's fraud, and conspiracy, and theft. I counted off on my fingers. I'm not a lawyer, but I dated one in college, and even she would call this a legal slam dunk. My father, suddenly more alert, looked at Wade with narrowed eyes. Is this true? Wade, ever the salesman, attempted damage control. Dad, it's a legitimate investment opportunity that doesn't exist, I finished. I have satellite images of the empty lot, documentation of the liens, and evidence that you falsified the investment materials. I also have records of every transfer, every email, and every text message discussing how to hide the money from me. I pulled out my phone, opening my Photos app. Want to see the vacant lot where your retirement community is supposedly being built? It's currently home to 3 stray dogs and what appears to be an abandoned refrigerator. Estelle's father, Floyd, who had been suspiciously quiet, finally spoke up. You gave them our retirement money too? He asked Estelle, his voice breaking. The $50,000 we gave you for safe investment? And there it was, the second bomb I didn't even have to drop. Wade had been working both sides of the family tree, apparently. 50,000? I repeated, genuinely surprised. Well, that explains the BMW upgrades and the Rolex that mysteriously appeared last month. I was wondering how a mid-level timeshare salesman was affording those on commission. Martha Kendrick looked like she might faint into her fettuccine. Floyd, you said Estelle was putting that into treasury bonds. She told me she was, he protested, turning to his daughter with betrayal written across his face like the specials on Olive Garden's chalkboard. The beautiful chaos unfolding before me was better than any Netflix drama. Wade and Estelle, caught in their web of lies. The parents, realizing their golden children were actually fool's gold. Aunt Meredith, for once, speechless. I've already frozen the accounts, I informed them calmly, and I've scheduled a meeting with the Police Financial Crimes Unit on Thursday morning. They're very interested in Wade's pattern of creating fake investment schemes. I checked my watch. You have about 36 hours to decide how you want to handle this. You wouldn't, Wade whispered, his perfect veneer cracking like cheap laminate flooring. Wouldn't I? You stole my wife and my savings. What exactly do you think I have left to lose? I stood up, dropping my napkin onto the plate. Oh, and before I forget, I've already spoken to your boss, Wade. Turns out, using company resources to create fraudulent investment materials violates about 17 corporate policies. Your key card has been deactivated. I turned to Estelle, whose face had gone from raccoon to ghost. The pharmaceutical board is also very interested in how a licensed sales representative ended up involved in financial fraud. I'm sure your next job interview will be fascinating. You've ruined us, she whispered. No, sweetheart, I replied, using the endearment she'd always hated. You did that all by yourselves. I'm just the historian, documenting the fall. The beauty of mutually assured destruction is watching people scramble to save themselves from the blast radius. I'd given Wade and Estelle 36 hours, but it only took 12 before my phone started lighting up like Times Square on New Year's Eve. First came the texts, Wade's desperate, "We need to talk," followed by Estelle's more calculated, "I can explain everything." My mother called 7 times, leaving voicemails that evolved from tearful pleas to stern demands that I fix this mess before it destroys the family. Fix this mess? Lady, I'm not the family janitor. I spent the night at the Hampton Inn, sleeping better than I had in months. The next morning, I woke up to 26 missed calls and the liberating knowledge that for once, none of it was my problem. While I graded papers on the Civil War at my hotel desk, the Sullivan and Kendrick families were engaged in their own civil war across town. According to Aunt Meredith, who'd switched allegiances faster than Italy in World War II, my father had nearly had a coronary when he verified the money trail himself. Turned out Wade had also borrowed $30,000 from my parents for the same phantom beachfront property. The house of cards was collapsing with beautiful symmetry. My only regret was not having stadium seating to watch it fall. Wade showed up at my hotel room at precisely 10:17 a.m., looking like he'd auditioned for the role of disgraced finance bro in a cable drama, unshaven, rumpled Oxford shirt, and the haunted eyes of a man watching his least luxury lifestyle circle the drain. "Archer, please," he said when I opened the door. "You can't go to the police." I leaned against the doorframe, sipping my gas station coffee. Fascinating. I was just thinking that exact same thing about you and Estelle 6 months ago, that you couldn't possibly betray your own brother. Yet here we are. It wasn't supposed to happen like this, he insisted, running his hands through his usually perfect hair. The investment was real at first, I swear. Things just got complicated. Like sleeping with my wife? Was that also a business complication? He had the decency to look away. That was a mistake. A mistake is using salt instead of sugar in your coffee, Wade. What you did was a calculated decision, made repeatedly, over months. Dad's threatening to disown me, he said quietly. My boss already fired me. Estelle's parents are talking about legal action. I took another sip of coffee, savoring the moment like the cheap breakfast blend. Sounds like you're having a rough day. Have you tried yoga? I hear it's very relaxing. Wade's desperation was palpable, a cologne more potent than his usual overpriced sandalwood. There's got to be a way to fix this. That's when I slid the folder across the small hotel desk. There is. Inside was a contract, drawn up by my college ex-girlfriend, who was now a very successful attorney with a well-documented dislike of cheaters, thanks to her father's 3 secret families discovered during her teenage years. Full restitution, I explained, as Wade skimmed the document with growing disbelief. Every penny returned to me, to Mom and Dad, and to the Kendricks. Plus interest, plus a written confession of the financial fraud, to be held by my attorney unless any terms are violated. This would bankrupt me, he whispered. Welcome to consequences, Wade. They're like those participation trophies you never got as a kid. And if I sign this, then I don't go to the police. The family scandal stays within the family. You get to rebuild your life from the smoking crater you created. And Estelle? I shrugged. She gets her own contract with her own consequences. You two can figure out your relationship dramas on your own time. I'm officially clocking out of that emotional labor. Wade signed the papers with a shaking hand, his signature as unsteady as his future employment prospects. As he handed the folder back, I saw something I'd never seen in my golden boy brother's eyes before. Respect. You planned all of this, he said. From the dinner reveal to the contracts. I'm a history teacher, Wade. We know how empires fall, always from within, always through arrogance, and always with signs that everyone ignores until it's too late. After Wade left, Estelle arrived precisely on schedule. Her negotiation took longer, involved more tears, and included a spectacular moment where she tried to claim that our marriage problems had driven her to both the affair and the fraud. Nice try, but my empathy well had run drier than the Sahara during a drought. She signed her own contract, agreeing to restitution, a clean divorce, and my personal favorite clause. She would explain to her parents exactly what she'd done with their retirement money, with me present as a witness. That meeting, held in the same Hampton Inn's sad little business center, was a masterclass in consequences. Martha Kendrick, who had spent 5 years making subtle digs about my career choice, watched in silent horror as her daughter admitted to stealing their savings for a fraudulent investment and a side dish of infidelity. We always thought Archer wasn't good enough for you, Floyd said quietly when Estelle finished her confession. Turns out we had it backwards. By Thursday morning, the deadline for my threatened police report, everything was signed, notarized, and filed. Wade had already liquidated his stock portfolio and emptied his savings to make the first restitution payment. Estelle had called her pharmaceutical company and taken a personal leave of absence before they could fire her for the ethical violations my anonymous tip had alerted them to. My parents invited me to dinner at their house, just the 3 of us. Mom had prepared my favorite meal, Dad had opened his special occasion bourbon, and they'd both aged about 10 years since Tuesday. We never should have made you feel less than your brother, my mother said over dessert, her eyes still red-rimmed from what had clearly been days of crying. We were wrong, my father added, which might have been the first time those words had ever crossed his lips in 65 years of life. About everything. Not everything, I corrected him. Wade's BMW really does get terrible gas mileage. You were right about that. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. You're a good man, Archer. A better man than... He stopped, unable to finish the comparison that had defined my entire life. Than anyone gave me credit for, I supplied. It's okay, Dad. I've always known who I am. And I had. That's what saved me. Knowing my own worth when everyone else was busy measuring it against my brother's fool's gold standard. 2 weeks later, I signed the lease on a new apartment in a different part of town. It had big windows, built-in bookshelves perfect for my history books, and not a single memory of Estelle or Wade. The faculty at school threw me a divorce party that was equal parts awkward and heartwarming. My department chair, Patricia, a twice-divorced battle axe with a heart of gold, presented me with a cake that read, "Congrats on losing 300 pounds of dead weight." You seem different, she observed as I laughed at the cake. Lighter. Turns out Betrayal is the ultimate weight loss program, I replied, accepting a slice. Who knew? As for Wade and Estelle, last I heard they were still together, living in Wade's now mortgaged condo, both working entry-level jobs to make the restitution payments. The Bluebird Motel had new management and a strict ID policy for room rentals. My parents had family dinners on Sundays, which I attended every other week, bringing graded papers and stories about my students instead of forced tolerance for my brother's bragging. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. And after years of living in the shadow of lies, honesty felt like standing in the sun. They say living well is the best revenge, but I found that living authentically beats it by a mile. 6 months after the Olive Garden apocalypse, as my faculty friends now call it, I'm sitting on the balcony of my new apartment, drinking actually good coffee instead of the swill Estelle used to insist was gourmet. The funny thing about being betrayed by everyone you trusted? It forces you to rebuild on a foundation of truth rather than expectations. When your life implodes at an Italian chain restaurant, surrounded by mediocre pasta and familial disappointment, you gain a certain clarity about what matters. It's been exactly 184 days since I last saw Estelle and Wade together. They're still technically a couple, though according to Aunt Meredith's intelligence network, more reliable than the CIA and twice as intrusive, they fight constantly about money, trust, and whose fault it was that they got caught. Turns out relationships founded on mutual betrayal aren't built to last. Who could have possibly predicted that plot twist? The monthly restitution payments arrive like clockwork, not because they're honorable people, but because my attorney has made the consequences for defaulting crystal clear. Wade is working at a car rental agency, having been blacklisted from financial sales after my anonymous tips to the regulatory board. Estelle is still on personal leave from her pharmaceutical job, working at a chain drugstore while the licensing board reviews her case. Every time their payments hit my account, I transfer half to a charity supporting education in underserved communities. The karmic cleansing feels appropriate, their deception funding someone else's opportunity. My parents are in therapy, both individually and as a couple. Turns out 40 years of marriage built on comparison and favoritism takes some professional help to untangle. Dad called me last week, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant, to ask if I'd help him understand this critical race theory stuff before his golf buddies brought it up again. We talked for an hour, our longest conversation that wasn't about Wade in my entire life. The Kendricks moved their retirement funds into a very conservative, very boring index fund managed by a fiduciary with no family connection whatsoever. Martha sent me a Christmas card signed "With Newfound Respect," which might be the Kendrick equivalent of a Nobel Peace Prize. As for me, I got tenure. Turns out the dean was impressed by how I handled my personal situation without letting it affect my teaching. My student evaluations actually improved during the semester of my divorce. Apparently, my lectures on historical betrayals took on a certain authenticity that resonated with the TikTok generation. I also started dating again, cautiously. Patricia set me up with her niece, Naomi, a veterinarian who'd been cheated on by her medical school boyfriend and consequently trusted animals more than people. Our first date consisted of comparing betrayal stories over craft beers, laughing until we cried, and then just crying. It wasn't romantic, but it was real. We've been seeing each other for 2 months now, taking it slow, both of us careful with our reconstructed trust. The truth is, betrayal doesn't define you, but how you respond to it does. I could have burned everything down, gone to the police immediately, pressed charges, destroyed Wade and Estelle completely. There were moments in that hotel room staring at ceiling tiles at 3 a.m. when I wanted to. Instead, I chose calculated consequences, not from a place of mercy, but from understanding that revenge is a dish best served with a side of life lessons. Wade called me last week, the first direct contact we've had in months. He asked if we'd ever be brothers again. "We'll always be brothers," I told him, "but we'll never be friends." He seemed to understand the difference. The most ironic part of this entire saga? I'm happier now than I was before. My apartment is smaller, but filled with books I actually read instead of furniture Estelle insisted would impress guests. My bank account is slowly recovering. My classroom discussions have never been more engaged. Nothing like personal experience to make the Brutus and Caesar betrayal hit different. Sometimes the universe has to tear down the life you thought you wanted to make room for the life you actually deserve. Or, as I tell my students when discussing the fall of empires, sometimes things have to completely collapse before they can be rebuilt properly. So here's my advice, distilled from the ashes of my former life. Pay attention to the details, trust your instincts, and always, always keep receipts, both literal and metaphorical. People show you who they are in the small moments, like when my brother would forget his wallet at family dinners, or when Estelle would roll her eyes whenever I talked about my students. The red flags are always there. We just paint them white to match our picket fences. Yesterday, I ran into my ex-mother-in-law at Target. We stood in the awkward purgatory of the household goods aisle, surrounded by shower curtains and bath mats, artifacts of domestic lives being built while mine had been dismantled. "You're looking well, Archer," she said, her southern politeness wrestling with her lingering resentment. "Betrayal agrees with me," I replied with a smile. "How's the retirement fund?" She adjusted her purse strap, a nervous tell I recognized from 5 years of Christmas dinners. "We'll manage. Floyd's decided to work another 2 years." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and meant it. Whatever their flaws, the Kendricks were collateral damage in a war they didn't start. "Estelle asks about you," she ventured. "I'm sure she does." I selected a plain blue bath mat, decisively adult and devoid of the inspirational phrases Estelle had insisted on. "Give her my regards and my sympathies. Dating Wade can't be easy when you know exactly how he treats family." As I walked away, Martha called after me, "We were wrong about you." I turned, shopping basket in hand. "Most people are. That's why I teach history, Mrs. Kendrick. Someone has to keep the record straight." The Sullivan family chronicles continue, revised and corrected. My parents are coming to dinner next week. I'm cooking, a skill I've developed since the divorce. Dad asked if he could bring my old baseball trophies he found in the attic. Mom's bringing photos from before Wade was born, when I was their only son. their whole world. We're not fixed, not completely, but we're facing the right direction now, moving toward honesty instead of appearances. As for Wade and Estelle, they're writing their own history now. I imagine it's a cautionary tale, the kind future generations will study and think, how did they not see this coming? But that's the thing about betrayal. Everyone thinks they're justified until the bill comes due at the Olive Garden, with interest, surrounded by unlimited breadsticks and limited sympathy. Me? I'm finally the protagonist in my own life story, no longer the supporting character in the Wade Sullivan show. Some days are harder than others, but not a single one makes me wish for my old life back. Because while betrayal breaks you initially, it also sets you free from the lies you've been living. And freedom, like revenge served cold with a side of justice, tastes sweeter than any Olive Garden chocolate lava cake ever could. The thing about history is that it doesn't repeat, but it often rhymes. I don't know what the next chapter holds, but for the first time in years, I'm writing it myself. No ghostwriters, no editors, no one trying to change my narrative to fit their preferred ending. And that, more than any revenge, is the true victory.